Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Corruption. Official
Yeah,
scorecard here with Corruption in Boxing.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Can you please take over Corruption and introduce us to this episode?
official corruption in boxing here. Coup d'etat of boxing back with a preview show, the third installment for Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. The weigh-in has just finished. T-Mobile Arena tomorrow night. New wrinkle within this fight, official. We're seeing Gennady Golovkin operating at 168 pounds. Canelo Alvarez having sort of fluctuated 160, 168, 175, losing his last encounter and now coming back down to 168 to try and retain some sort of dignity and pride and self-respect. Any deductions you made from the weigh-in?
Let me see. I would say that, when it comes to Canelo and the way he was looking at the weight in, it seems that, we all know that he's a consummate professional and he seemed to be in a great shape, but it's nothing new about Canelo. Uh, on the other hand, even since the rematch with Triple G, anytime he would meet Triple G before the fight, during the weigh-ins, press fight conferences, he seems very, how do you say, very aggressive, and at the same time, I don't know, maybe in some way a bit nervous, but I'm not the type of guy that would say that it has to translate in the ring. Usually, nervous fighters can even perform better. So it doesn't mean much to me. On the other hand, I would say the Triple G looked very good, and from what you remember, he seemed to be in the best physical shape.
Yes.
Also, throughout these past couple of months, when they were having press conferences together, Triple J seemed extremely relaxed, which was always the case with him, but it was even more pronounced now than ever before. At 18, it was the same thing. Maybe it's that weight cut that's making him happy, and he was even calmer than even before. And when it comes to his physical shape that he showed at weight in, I would say that his abs were more pronounced. I mean, yeah, I would say he's in a great shape.
You know, I mean, I certainly do pay attentions, to the weigh-in. Not that they're a sort of a definitive barometer of how the fight is going to go, but certainly with somebody like Alvarez, who we know has undergone a radical transformation in his body. Now, what I noticed, official, from the first to the second fight was that in the second fight, Canelo Alvarez didn't have as much muscle in his upper body. I was looking at his trapezius, his shoulders, and biceps, triceps, looking at those sort of definitions. Now, those he didn't have as much bulk in his upper body from what I could see compared to the first fight. And I think the big reason for that was obviously the drug scandal leading up to the fight, in which Canelo thought he could be cute and sort of operate around the sort of 8 weeks, with VADA officials obviously catching him in Mexico as opposed to in San Diego. And I think leading into the fight, there must have been some sort of more regimental sort of drug testing enforcement, and Alvarez obviously a little bit cautious about not taking as much human growth hormones and sort of insulin, cortisol, and his upper body wasn't definitely as big. And I think that made a difference in the second fight compared to the first, because Alvarez had, from what I could deduce, he had greater speed on his punches. He had a little bit more fluid rhythm, and I think the speed was definitely a factor that gave him a much better performance compared to the first fight, where he was doing what Canelo was doing at the higher up weights, in which he was simply loading up on his punches, and Gennady was able to just dominate the fight. So I think a big indicator to what happens in this fight is what sort of Alvarez are we going to get. If we're going to get an Alvarez who has fallen in love with his power, and sadly his boxing skills, which he does have become more and more redundant. If it's that sort of Alvarez, then Golovkin definitely has a great chance, because I think it'll be a very similar fight to the Murata fight, in which Murata was coming forward and looking to fight. Neither fighter was too competent in fighting on the back foot or going backwards. So if it's an Alvarez, an aggressive Alvarez that's there to fight in the middle of the ring inside the pocket, then I think that'll suit Golovkin a lot more.
Well, before getting into the fight and how I see both of them performing in the ring, I have to address what you just said about Canelo Alvarez's weight, because it's funny, you and me, we never discussed about that topic, comparing Canelo's weight, etc., in the previous fights. But I completely agree with you. Many boxing fans falsely believe that. I heard them saying that, in fact, that Canelo was bigger in the second fight than in the first fight against Triple G, which was not the case at all. He was really huge, and even before the very first fight, even on Instagram, posting a picture or two of himself, he was looking insanely huge. And then, well, I would say that he was lighter in the ring in the rematch doesn't necessarily mean that the fighter is not on something. It may be that he's on different types of things like EPO, etc. Doesn't matter. Most of them are on something anyways. But yeah, I came to the same conclusion in the rematch. He was lighter and quicker, and that's the thing that allowed him to throw the career high amount of punches, if I'm not wrong. Now, one more thing that I want to add before letting you go talk about this fight. Well, for this fight, I haven't sent you the link, but from a few days ago, there's a short clip that Canelo posted on Instagram, on his social media, and he was in the sweatsuit, and he finished the workout. It was 7 days from the fight. When he was changing himself, changing his sweatsuit, his pants, the pants of his sweatsuit, man, the sweat, the amount of sweat that was, but corruption without, it was literally pouring out as if you let the water run in your bathroom, which brought me to the idea that he's probably going to rehydrate really a lot tomorrow night. So please go on.
When was that? When was that clip?
It was from something like 6 or 7 days before the fight, so
Okay.
5-6 days ago.
So he's looking to crush a bit of weight quite substantially a week out, rather than a phased process of delineation to cut down the weight, which is never a good sign. 1 week out, you shouldn't be really in a sweatsuit. If you're talking about that, you've had at least 2-3 months to prepare for the fight, and you're only coming down from 175 to 168 pounds. It's not really a good indication, but I'm not sure what Canelo gets to in between fights. He's got a very lavish, exorbitant wealth. He's probably enjoying life. He's married, kids, etc. So I don't know whether the propensity to maintain his weight at a reasonable amount is good. But when you're fluctuating between different weights because you're obsessed with just becoming the biggest name in boxing, and I don't know, Golovkin to me, I think he's just had a. I've been monitoring his progress, and the good thing is that he's not coming into the fight having been out the ring for 14 months. The Murata fight was an excellent fight, not only from a physical standpoint, but certain aspects that I've seen in that fight and some of the adjustments he made in the fight, which I'll talk about as well. So I think it gave him a lot more time with Jonathan Banks, and you can clearly see a different Golovkin, certainly from the middle of the fight to the latter rounds. You can see Golovkin making different sort of adjustments under Jonathan Banks than he did with Abel Sanchez. And when I look at the first Canelo Alvarez fight, Golovkin made an adjustment in the fourth round where he started to turn Alvarez, turning to his left. Now, what he was doing in the Murata fight is that he was actually pivoting to his right. And that was a dangerous strategy in the Murata fight. And it was a little bit surprising why he was doing that. Because what Murata would do, he would feint, and then Golovkin would bite on the feint. Then he would throw the right hand to the body. Golovkin would try and react. Now, at 40 years old, I can see that Golovkin doesn't really have the reactions. He doesn't have those reflexes. So when Golovkin tried to react to the right to the body, Murata would actually come up on the same side and hit him with the right hand to the head in that same sort of sequence, because of Golovkin actually primarily trying to come in on Murata, and his right hand is obviously his more dominant hand. So Murata was having good success. And when I spoke to you before, I was saying that one thing that Murata doesn't have is good punch success. His success rate is not that good. But he was very accurate in that fight. So it clearly said to me that Golovkin's sort of reactions and reflexes are not there. But what Golovkin did do in that fight was the adjustments he made was that he started then pivoting to get away from Murata's right hand. So he started going in the opposite direction to the conventional side in which an orthodox fighter should be going. And what Golovkin started to do in that fight was very nice free punch combinations. His jab, his uppercut, and that left hand corkscrew over the top. That free punch combination from the middle stages of the fight, and not taking as much punishment with Murata's right hand because of his movement and moving to the correct to get away from the right hand. So some very good adjustments and some good combination punching, and his uppercut and that left hook was just working a treat.
Yeah, that's a good catch, man. I even forgot about that. I mean, I'm sure we noticed it in our post fight after that fight in a show that we did. But yeah, so yeah, and that uppercut lately serves Golovkin very well, which he showed in the rematch with Canelo. And
Yes.
yeah, I can even remember at the beginning of the fight, the commentators, I'm talking about the Murata fight, commentators were criticizing Golovkin for doing the same thing. Then, just like you said, you're right. In fact, he started moving outside of Murata's lead foot. But then, when he said that knockout, he started circling towards Murata's right hand again, and that's how
Again.
he I posted a few days ago on Twitter a post explaining people how in that knockout stoppage sequence he was circling toward Murata's right hand, so he would make Murata pivot towards Golovkin uh, and jabbing. And the moment Murata jabs on the pivot, Golovkin would time it, and basically Murata would offer the outside angle to Golovkin by pivoting, trying to pivot towards Golovkin, and sometimes he would do it too quickly, trying to catch Golovkin with a jab, and that's when Golovkin would just pause and time it with that overhand right, which was perfect. Man, I have many things to say about this fight, and it's really confusing to me how it's going to play out because I have really a lot of things to say, and I'm wondering about many things. I know a lot of things that Canelo should be doing, but I'm wondering if he's going to do it because uh, I can say I noticed I was one of the first to notice the change in Canelo's offense since 2019 after the Jacobs fight when he started fighting Kovalev and then the 68 pounders. Um, so before we know how Canelo was, he was, I would say, more patient and was was throwing combos fluid. His combos were more fluid, and he would use his combos. He never had a very good work rate, but when he would throw before, he would do it with combos, trying to set up his opponent that way. But since the Kovalev fight, what he's doing is he's basically blitzkrieging his opponent by stepping in with either a setup punch, like setup jab, or a feint, or to make them tighten their guard and then um, follow it up with a huge haymaker, either a huge right hook, overhand, left hook, and he's trying to catch them to put that setup punch or feint and the power punch together as closely as possible. Maybe it's possible that he changed his offensive approach because those fighters, those opponents were in height and reach. They were bigger than him, and they were most of them were light on their feet. So, and being that Canelo doesn't have a very quick feet, maybe that's why he was looking to blitzkrieg them with that. Rather, I would say it becomes easy to see at one point of the fight. Because he's doing all the same thing. I mean, he would switch it up. One time he would throw a setup jab, follow it up with the right hook. Next time he would throw an uppercut instead of the right hook, etc. But it's always done with same timing. And I was thinking that maybe it's because those fighters are bigger than him in height and reach, and they're light on his feet. So he basically had to do whatever he can to catch them quickly because he knows that they're going to move out. But then, if you go back and watch even his offense, even the Yildirim fight, was not really that different. And so it really seems that it's not because of his opponent's size that he's doing, but he really changed his offensive approach. And look, one thing that I want to say about it, I would say that would be easy for Golovkin to see. Now, yeah, at the same time, it does make him punch harder, no matter what the other people are saying, because he puts much more leverage than back then when he was more nimble and throwing fluid combos. So he punches harder, but it's also easier to see and predict, becomes more predictable. Now, with such an approach, I can see Golovkin having an easier time when it comes to boxing with Canelo, that he would have much more success in winning rounds. So I kind of find it hard to believe that Canelo himself and his team would not see that and change that approach because yeah, he can hurt Golovkin with those punches more than he did in the previous fights. if he goes in blitzkrieging him with sledgehammers. But man, I find it hard to believe that he would not recognize that it would be too predictable for Golovkin. So it's one thing that, so I'm clearly seeing what he's been doing these last few years, but I think that it would be smarter for him to revert back to what he was doing in the rematch. But then another thing is, would he be able to do it as good in the rematch if he reverts back to what he was doing in the rematch, setting a lot more traps from back to front foot, etc., and throwing more combos than he does now? It's also maybe hard for him, being that he went up in weight, added more muscles, etc. So I'm even wondering, even that approach, how would it go for him? I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, it is an interesting question, because when you've operated at a certain weight for so long, but given that your metabolism, etc., hence is slowing down, his weight may be naturally just increasing a little bit, and it becomes a little bit more difficult for him to then redact that weight to get back down. So 168, I think, will be comfortable for him. He wouldn't have had to work hard at all to maintain or even to reduce weight. He's simply not cutting any weight at all. That's the point I'm trying to make, to operate at 168. So I think he'll be more hydrated, and from a lot of the images I've seen post sparring in some of the interviews, yeah, his skin looks certainly hydrated. It looks red, rosy. He looks naturally healthy. There's none of that sort of grey, ashy look in which your body is just extracting a lot of chemicals when you're trying to lose a lot of weight. You're really like putting on those bags and bin liners, etc., and just staying in saunas for excessive periods to reduce a massive amount of weight. So your body is then losing a hell of a lot of proteins, and your urine becomes all foamy as well and stuff like that, which is certainly not the preparation you want for a fight like this. So with Golovkin, I've got no particular issues, but with Alvarez, and certainly that revelation that you made about him losing a hell of a lot of weight, or operating with facilitators to help actually lose a hell of a lot more sweat, and obviously weight and salt as well, which retains a lot of water weight. Sugar will retain more, but salt definitely uh, quite sort of bizarre. But I guess the main question is has that forced Canelo Alvarez to take stock? Has it forced him to actually reset and address the situation, and think that this loading up, swinging wild hooks, not even setting up punches, not even counter punching, well, effectively, but when you're fighting such stellar opposition as Avni, the final level boss Yildirim, and all of these people, you can operate on 30-40% and get a victory. There's no fear. You don't have to work extremely hard. These guys are just taking dives as well. Ex-sparring partners, etc. So you don't even know what the hell is a legitimate fight or not. But now, a different sort of challenge. Golovkin is not going there to lie down. Although this fight, certainly gives him enough money to retire and make sure that his entire family is set up as well. But I don't know. I'm not sure whether Canelo has that sort of humbleness and that humility to try and reset. I think he's an impulsive sort of character, although he may look calm, but you can see there is an underlying belligerent sort of disrespect and disdain towards Golovkin. I think he is determined to try and knock him out, but it's not a wise strategy against somebody who's never has never even really been hurt significantly. The only times that you've seen him in the Murata definitely hurting with a couple of shots. And the first time I've seen Golovkin hurt with headshots in that fight as well. But apart from that, there's nothing that we've seen that'll indicate that Golovkin is simply there, simply at the end of his career now, and therefore an opportunity for Canelo to sort of finish him off. It's a possibility, but I don't see that.
To me, with all the unknowns about this fight, meaning that Triple G is moving up, his age, etc., the fact that his age may show up at any moment, at any fight, it's so difficult to predict the fight. I really do think that, and I'll get into it, but I basically think that both fighters can win. Now it's debatable scorecards, etc. But I can see both of them winning on scorecards and winning by stoppage. Golovkin, he showed to be a bit slower, which is normal with his age. His foot movement, foot speed, and being that he added muscles lately. So he may be there to hit more times than he would got hit in the past, in the rematch and in the first fight. So that may be also one of the things that's how I can see Canelo stopping him to the body, for example. I would not be shocked. That's not what I would predict, but I would not be surprised. And yeah, people say yeah, but
you mean Canelo
on.
stopping him you mean Canelo stopping him with a punch to the nuts, yeah?
Yeah, but look, that's exactly the thing that I was about to bring up. People are saying, and they're right. I said it myself too, that Murata was hitting him under below the belt with rabbit punches, etc. But guess what? Canelo was also doing it in the rematch I saw while preparing the breakdown videos. I was looking closely at that fight, and I saw Canelo catching him not only on the body but below the belt, on the hips. Once he even caught him with an elbow on the inside. So yeah, but that we recognize when we see illegal blows, but when referee does not call it, those punches are still hurting. They are still hurtful, and if a referee doesn't do anything about them, then it changes nothing below or about the belt. I see the chance of Golovkin getting hurt, and yeah, Canelo often goes to the hips, etc. I lost my train of thoughts. Do you want to say something?
I think the key weapon in this fight, as it was in their previous fights, is going to be the jab. Golovkin's jab was excellent in the second fight. Alvarez's jab was good in the second fight, but the way they sort of utilize the jab is very different now. Canelo's lead jab, what I found, official, is not that good. Given that he's a shorter fighter, and he doesn't really have the footwork to collapse the pocket and try and set up his jab, certainly against Golovkin, who has then the advantage of having the higher ground. And Alvarez doesn't use a high guard when he's from the outside. He'll actually get very sideways on, but he'll turn his right hand so it'll be palm facing to try and parry the jab. Now, whereas Golovkin, he can control distance and range from the outside, and it works well. But Golovkin is a momentum fighter. So he gets energized by the success he has, and that's how he reels off rounds. And you see him later on in fights. So he will then, once he's having success, then he'll start multiplying the jab, 2, 3, and then stepping off to his left as well. But with Alvarez, when Golovkin is usually initiating the leads, Alvarez would try and take a step back and counter with a hard right hand, short, explosive right. But when Canelo actually comes inside and both of them are exchanging, that's when Canelo's jab is at its best. Sometimes in between the combinations to counter Golovkin's left, certainly left hand to the body, but then Alvarez would finish off an exchange with a jab and then take a step back. And it was those jabs that was snapping Golovkin's head back, whereas I think Golovkin's jab from a lead was much better.
Oh, well, look, for example, tomorrow I'm dropping on my channel one of the videos. Well, the very first video that I'm going to drop is Canelo's jab in the rematch. And it has a lot to do with stance. He was setting traps all the time in that first half of the fight. And I think that in that first half of the fight, it's Canelo's jab that made it difficult for Golovkin. Now, of course, Triple G has probably the best jab in the game. So it may not be the fastest jab, etc., the most explosive, but it's man, he can do so many things with it, and plus it's super hard as a jab. But Canelo, he was very interesting with his own jab, and that was the last time he used his jab since that fight. What he was doing, he was setting traps. I think that it comes from him training on the Cobra bag, because he looks to get into a wide stance. So that's what he was doing in the rematch. He gets in that wide stance. He sneaks his front foot forward or back foot backwards, so he can be at the edge of Golovkin's reach, and that's how he said he caught him with many times with those traps, where he would stay over his front foot, maybe throw a setup punch, then wait for Golovkin to answer it and pull back and come back in with a punch with a counter of his own. And he did a great job of moving, of shifting his upper body from the rear to front foot, etc. And that's how his jab was so tricky. And what I liked about it, when he, or like you said, when he would get in close and put his upper body over his front foot, having a high guard, he would snap the jab. It would be so explosive and non-telegraphed because he would snap it. I'm talking about Canelo. He snaps it from his shoulder, and yeah, I liked it a lot. But I cannot remember all the details that I'm going to mention in the video that I'm going to drop tomorrow. But yeah, of course, in the battle of the jabs, it's ultimately Golovkin. I don't know if anyone can do it better when it comes to jab from today's boxers. So, but anyways, I still liked Canelo's jab a lot. Now, yeah, I remember what I wanted to say earlier. The last night I watched a short interview from Jonathan Banks, and he himself recognized that new Canelo's offense, that sledgehammering, blitzkrieging his opponent with one quick punch, haymaker, etc. And he said himself that the key for this fight is going to be the volume. And Golovkin himself and Banks said multiple times recently, they suggested that they would not be there necessarily to brawl, but to rather box. And despite Golovkin not being the same fighter that Bivol is, because Golovkin certainly likes to plant his feet much more than Bivol does. While Bivol is extremely disciplined about not getting hit and controlling the distance, the range all the time. It may be useful for Golovkin, yeah, to box and not to try to catch him with huge punches, because he was already catching him in the rematch with those short uppercuts. Many times he would entice Canelo to step in and load up on his
Yes.
left hook up or down.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Golovkin would time it with a very short uppercut, and Golovkin doesn't have the same. His hand speed is inferior to Canelo's, but being that he did not telegraph those punches, unlike with his overhand Golovkin would telegraph it often, or load up on it a bit too much, which is not the case with his uppercut, and that's one of the reasons why I thought his uppercuts were murderous weapon in the rematch.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only in that, but in the Murata fight, his uppercuts were splitting Murata's guard regularly, and the guy who operates behind a high guard, and then that corkscrew left hand coming over Murata's right hand, counter right hand, and actually landing on top of his head with the thumb almost pointing downwards. That's a vicious punch. Very effective punch when you're sort of looping it like that. That sort of weird trajectory. A good weapon. But when you were talking about the Alvarez jab and the effectiveness, now when Golovkin is in front of Alvarez, as he was in the rematch, when you're in front of an opponent who is shorter, has better lower sense of gravity, has faster hands, is a better combination puncher, has shorter distance to hit your body as well, because you're an explosive type of fighter. When Golovkin is directly in front of him, it was harder for him to actually breach Alvarez's defenses, because Canelo can take steps back, and he was just looking for those opportunities to counter. When they were exchanging, that's when Golovkin's power punches was coming, and his added power was definitely having an effect. But when Golovkin started turning Alvarez from the fourth round, it's quite ironic, because we talk about a guy who doesn't have as much inflection in his footwork, but he actually punches better than Alvarez when he's actually moving. And when he's turning Alvarez, he's actually firing in very good counter punches as well. So if Jonathan Banks is talking about boxing not necessarily having a one-dimensional approach, trying to sort of replicate what Alvarez is trying to do, and sort of blitzkrieging and breaking him down and knocking him out, but mixing it up, but definitely boxing a lot more, I think that's a wise strategy. I think Alvarez is definitely not the best fighter to react to fighters who are moving. Hence the reason why I think he's never wanted to fight. That's why he had problems with Landy Lara. He had problems with Austin Trout. It's no coincidence. Had problems with Floyd Mayweather. He does not have that sort of ability against fighters who can move. He'll fire speculative punches when they're moving to try and cut off the ring, because it's trying to negate his inability of his feet to actually do it. So he'll do it by throwing sort of wild punches to try and stop them moving, but it's not really an effective strategy. But somehow the judges seem to reward him for those sort of speculative shots. So whenever Golovkin, I think the more Golovkin does move and moves to the correct distance, what it said to me in the first fight against a better Alvarez that we've seen at 160 pounds is that whenever Golovkin was doing that, and the fourth round is particular, people should go back and watch that. When he started initiating his turning, he was clearly winning them. Canelo couldn't even land a punch on him.
Are you talking about the first fight or the rematch?
The rematch.
Mm-hmm. Well, I cannot remember that round. But yeah, no surprise. You know what? I caught the glimpse of Canelo's fight against Danny Jacobs earlier today. I really scrolled through it just to see what type of offense Canelo was using. And even old and way past his prime, Danny Jacobs, whose footwork and foot speed were not the same as they were just 2 3 years before that fight, by moving, he really made it difficult for Canelo Alvarez's offense to penetrate and catch him. And yeah, I saw a lot of those things that you mentioned just moments ago. When Danny was moving, Canelo would jump in with hooks or other things to prevent him from to prevent Jacobs from using his lateral movement and escaping the ropes, etc. So even that Jacobs, just with his movement, and he was not moving as much as he used to in his prime, really made it difficult for Canelo's offense. And another thing is that I forgot to mention is that I saw one or two clips from this training camp from Triple G, and him doing the pad work with Jonathan Banks. And the difference was like in all of his previous fights before, we used to see him throw, even when he throws combos, not just single sledgehammers, but even combos, he would load up on punches on the right hand, hook, etc. But right now he was his work on the pads was much different. He was popping those pads, and yeah, really suggesting that he's really going to box.
Yeah. I think the commission have got to keep an eye on Eddie Reynoso, certainly administering smelling salts to give Canelo an explosion of energy later on in the fight, when clearly he's a different fighter in the second half. And it's quite ironic, official, when you compare the second Golovkin and Alvarez fight and the recent second Usyk and Joshua fight. Now, they were both, one could say, close fights coming into the championship rounds. Golovkin won the 10th round, the 11th round, the 12th round. In the 10th round, when Canelo tried that grazing left hook, Golovkin hit him with that fading right, overhand right. And you can see Alvarez from, say he was in the northwest corner, because he was on that side, to disengage and almost go on the east quadrant of the ring, backing up against the ropes, and still hurt at the beginning of the 11th round because he was up against the ropes literally from that point onwards. So a lot of these people saying that Golovkin was backed up by Alvarez in the second fight. He was never backed up at any instance in the fight. It was actually Alvarez who was backed up in the 10th and the 11th from being hurt by the hardest punch of the fight. But the point being is that Golovkin won the championship rounds, and he was the champion coming into the fight. And the same with Usyk and Joshua. If people think it was a very close fight, but who clearly won the championship rounds? Usyk, and they say those rounds were crucial for him to actually achieve victory. But Usyk was obviously rewarded, but Golovkin wasn't. Very similar sort of situation, which it just makes a mockery of how that second fight was adjudicated. Because me personally, I thought Golovkin had won the first, the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and the 10th, and the 11th, and the 12th.
Interesting, but me personally, I never agree with that saying that it goes up to who wins the championship rounds. The thing that I'm watching for is for one fighter to win more rounds than the other fighter, no matter what rounds those are. And I think that it's just an excuse from boxing media and to to justify protecting the A side. But I see your point, and definitely in both cases, just like Usyk did. In my opinion, Golovkin even won not the last 3 rounds, but the last 4 or 5 rounds in the row, from what I remember. I ultimately, every time I watched it, I scored it 8-4 for Golovkin. And yeah, but by the end of the fight, which is often the case with Golovkin, you always see it even in his other fights, not only with Canelo, but with Derevyanchenko or with Murata. As the fight progresses, I'm telling you, Golovkin is so cerebral. He's one of the best when it comes to ring IQ and reading his opponents and getting down. He's scanning their what they're how they react, etc. And so by the end of the fight, he gets in such a good rhythm, in groove, where
Yeah,
because he goes, in the earlier stages of the fight. Well, at the very beginning, he starts slow. Then from the fourth, fifth round on, etc., he would start, doing different things and setting up punches, etc. But then the final few rounds, he gets in a groove with his footwork and everything, with his combos, and he becomes more fluid. And that was the case. That's exactly what I was seeing in the rematch. Also, being that, in my opinion, Canelo was doing fantastic job in the first half of the fight with those traps, with his footwork. And his work from mid to long range, shifting his upper body, setting traps. The reason why One of the reasons why Golovkin was so successful by the end of that fight is that when he pressured Canelo with not with footwork but with punches, throwing more combos and a lot of jabs. His jab is more fluid, in the earlier rounds, he would throw a jab or two and step out, etc. But by the end of the fight, he was pumping the jab non-stop, no matter if he's stepping in or out of range. But he never stopped throwing the jab, and so it prevented Canelo from moving, because Canelo got used to moving, stepping back to evade one or two punches, then come back. But by then, Golovkin figured out what Canelo was doing. That after leaning back, Canelo would step back in with the counter. So with that volume, with jab, he prevented him from doing so, and he was catching him all the time, rendering Canelo's offense, mm, making it really, taking it out. Let's put it that way.
yeah. And when you talk about some of the adjustments and some of the differences with Golovkin under Jonathan Banks, now in the Murata fight, we saw defensive adjustments from Golovkin, which I think exacerbated the downfall of Murata as well. Now, as I mentioned, that his stationary reactions to jabs and headshots from the outside is not as good. But what he started doing in the middle rounds was that we always talk about Canelo's upper body movement and his waist movement. It was actually Golovkin's waist movement. If you look at him slipping and sliding the punches, and then sometimes going on the shoulder roll to block Murata's right hand, his defense actually got better as the fight progresses. It became more damaging and obviously tiring for both fighters. And I think it was that taking less punishment with those adjustments and slipping the punches a lot better, and then implementing his combinations, as I mentioned, in particular his jab, uppercut, left hand, combined with slipping those punches. I think so. Offensively and defensively, it was just a one-way direction that fight was going from that point onwards.
Yeah, and more to your point, even his performance against Sheremeta, yeah, that was not surely not a Hall of Fame type of opponent, but the way he was fighting in that fight was so smooth and fluid, and that's exactly what he was doing against Sheremeta, doing a great job of using his upper body movement and setting traps and countering timing. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on that.
Mm.
You know what? I also want to say that you see, especially in the rematch,
Yeah,
Canelo, what he's doing uh, when he's trying to close the distance, for example, very often from that high guard, when he puts up a high guard and he is trying to get on the inside, he would stick his right glove forward, which he often uses to smother the opponent's lead hand, so he can smother the opponent's right hand and step right behind it to close the distance.
yeah,
But against Golovkin, he was also using it as a trap, making Golovkin believe that he was about to do that to get on the inside, just to provoke a punch from Golovkin, a left hook, etc. And that's how he caught him with he caught Golovkin with counters a couple of times, or he would use that right glove, stick it out, and then wait for Golovkin's punch just to slip underneath it and get on the inside. And it was vicious the way he was setting up his left hook. It's difficult to explain it without showing the film right now, but many times, when he throws a right hand, he he leaves it. He sticks his right shoulder right after throwing a punch. He pushes it into Golovkin so he can step behind it and close the distance, and at the same time, his left shoulder is already uh, behind him and ready to throw a left hook. But Golovkin also in that rematch showed an excellent adjustment when it comes to his defense on the inside against Canelo. How he was reading what Canelo, the way Canelo was setting up his left hook, then the right hooks and uppercuts. His capability to adjust are really top notch. Now, yeah, his reaction time and being slowed down physically, that's a big question. I don't know. I would say that. Look, at one moment I was telling myself maybe in fact Golovkin stands a really good chance of winning the decision if it goes full 12, being that he's criticizing, he's very vocal about judges in the previous two fights. And that way he's probably putting pressure on judges not to screw him up.
absolutely.
And that's very smart. And couple that with the fact that if Canelo comes in with the same offensive approach as he did in his previous fights, blitzkrieging, Triple G with one sledgehammer punch, it would be easier indeed for Golovkin to make it clear that he's winning the rounds. But on the other hand, we all knew that even leading to the rematch, that Golovkin got robbed in the first fight. And what judges did, they only made sure to score the fight close, no matter if one had it for Golovkin and the other two for Canelo. So I'm only wondering that there is a good probability Golovkin, no doubt, is doing a smart thing, putting pressure on judges. But I'm just wondering if even that would be enough, being that even judges adjusted in the rematch by making sure to give close rounds, and that way not as many people were protesting about Canelo getting the win in the rematch as they would if there was any white scorecard for Canelo.
I mean, we know that boxing is directly correlated to what happens in the markets and the betting markets. Now, when governments want to induce a shock, even an isometric shock, they will do it without the markets sometimes understanding the degree of the shock. Say if it's an interest rate change, they may postulate to the markets that it's only going to be 50 basis points, but then it could be 100, and they have to get that surprise element to actually induce any sort of effects or a trickle down effect. If there's inflationary pressures now within the betting markets, operate on the same thing, because for this particular fight, from what I've seen, a lot of the money is definitely on Alvarez, and I think what's been feeding into that is that a lot of the indicators and all of the boxing media have all been making predictions that Alvarez obviously wins the fight as well, basing it primarily, I guess, on Golovkin's age. So a lot of the betting markets and indexes around the world, therefore, will actually make a lot of money if Canelo Alvarez actually lost the decision. Although the biggest margins and some of the biggest, so the margin swings could definitely be on Golovkin, but the overright favorite is definitely an Alvarez, and it's very comfortable, and I can definitely see the ratio of money is actually placed on Alvarez to Golovkin is massively in favor of Alvarez. So it's one of those situations that although the odds are not going to be brilliant for an Alvarez victory, you may get a little bit if you're betting for a specific outcome or whether it's a points decision or a knockout victory. Yeah, that's where the money could potentially be made. But given that the first two fights were on points and nobody was dropped or close to going, well, they were definitely hurt. I mean, Alvarez was definitely hurt in both fights, quite more significantly than Golovkin, absolutely. But he wasn't wobbling or sort of stumbling around too much, so it doesn't give the indication that there will be knockdowns or a knockout in the third fight. But yeah, there's not a lot of money on Alvarez. There's not a lot of financial return, certainly for these markets if Canelo, wins the fight. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Golovkin winning, because at the end of the day, they have no underlying loyalty to any fighter. Their underlying loyalty is to their stakeholders and shareholders and to whatever consortium or syndicate or whatever organized crime family, they're ultimately has granted their license and who they operate by it. So anything is possible in this fight.
Yeah, definitely. And people would say, even for Golovkin, anyone picking Golovkin by stoppage, like, what makes you believe that he will be able to do that, being that he was unable to do it in the first two fights when he was younger than these 40 years old of Golovkin? So, yeah, it makes sense, but at the same time, look. What is possible given that, let's say, Golovkin, uh, given the fact that he slowed down a bit, that doesn't prevent him from getting hit with too many punches from Canelo that he would evade just a few years ago. And being that he's looking very comfortable, at least before this fight, first time at 168, and being that he knows Canelo, uh, it's very possible. In fact, yesterday I placed two little bets. One was at the decimal odds of 53 on Golovkin stopping him in the 11th round, and one at the decimal odds of 81 in the 12th round, Golovkin in the 12th round by stoppage. Because I can see it, and I would not be surprised. I mean, that's why I put those bets. I don't know how to tell you. And even if he's plus on top of that, if he's able to catch Canelo swinging, if Canelo does the same thing with the same approach, I'm repeating myself, but if he comes in with that setup punch and a sledgehammer right behind it, Golovkin is smart enough that he could be able to time it. And on top of that, in the later rounds, Canelo would slow down when it comes to his endurance. So I see it as a real possibility.
I mean, when you assess the ratio corruption sort of index of the scoring of the two fights, then Golovkin was the dominant fighter in the first fight. I think most observers had the fight around 9 rounds to 3, and what happened in the first fight, it was a draw. So Golovkin still couldn't even get that victory. The second fight, not as dominant, definitely, as the first fight, but it's interesting that the swing of perception in the second fight. But let's just say hypothetically how we scored it based on critical sort of analysis and sort of punch stats, which you've done. Let's just say, for argument's sake, 8 rounds to 4. That's the way I scored the fight, definitely. So Golovkin going from a 9-3 to an 8-4, and Canelo gets the victory in the second fight. Now, on the basis of that ratio, Golovkin would have to win the fight decisively, 10 rounds to 2, even 11 rounds to 1, or 12 rounds to zip, to actually get a victory. And the point being that he's not at that sort of level now that he was in the first fight. He's obviously way past his best and doesn't have the same physical prowess as in the first fight, even though he was still probably past his best even in the first fight. So a regressed Golovkin is not going to get a victory. He's not going to have a decisive victory like that for a victory, and that may be an indication of how I'm, looking at the fight. Unless the only wrinkle into that sort of analysis is if Golovkin is able to, significantly hurt Alvarez and perhaps even put him down or even put him out. But there's nothing that I saw even in Canelo in the Bivol fight to say that he sustained a certain level of damage. And given that explosive fighters, once they start losing that snap, that 60-meter sort of explosiveness, once they sort of lose that, then it's all a downhill equation, or they're going to have to rely on their contingency skills to get them through fights. With Alvarez, he's going to have a big problem because a lot of those elements have become more and more redundant given the higher weights he's operating and the different sort of strategy that he's looking at, different sort of training regimes, and just really looking to blast opponents out, maybe to become more of a fan-friendly fighter. So I just don't see that. I don't really see a knockout in sort of concluding getting down to the nitty-gritty in these fights, I think it'll be a reasonably close and competitive fight, much like the second fight.
Sorry for. Oh, go on. Sorry, I cut you off because your mic sounded bad for a second, but it's normal now. Sorry for cutting you off.
Yeah, no, I was finished, man. You go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's the safe bet that there would be no stoppage in the fight, and even when you take the history of betting with over and under, it's always more probable to. It's basically playing with the better's emotions, where making them invest to believe that a fight or any type of match, sporting event would go over. But as you know it probably way better than me, yeah, it's not always the case. The safe bet is to bet under. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. But I would say that there is I mean, still those two bets that I placed, those little bets, are value bets because and look, the difference in between this fight against Golovkin and Canelo's fight with Bivol is that Bivol was really defense first, even despite being very active and in fact tiring out Canelo with his non-stop work rate. The way he was fighting, he was more cautious and making sure of not getting hit or getting hit as less as possible against Canelo than trying to hurt him. And I saw a couple of times that he caught him with good punches, and that's when I did the post-fight show for Canelo Bivol, and I said that Canelo has one of the best poker faces. Yeah, many times you would say the reason he was going back to ropes was probably because he was tired for sure, and maybe on top of that, probably frustrated by not being able to find a solution for people and his footwork and timing. But also, I think that he got caught really good a couple of times, and that it's just his poker face that prevent the viewers from seeing it. So the difference is with Golovkin, even though all the indications are that he's going to box more than I don't know, but I'm sure when he gets an opportunity, he would try to set him up for real powerful punches and set it up in a smart way, not pushing it like in their first fight. It was visible that at that time Golovkin was overconfident in his overhand right, which was way too predictable for Canelo. But already in the rematch, the things seemed different. Triple G in the rematch was much more cerebral and showcased once again his ring IQ, and he did a lot of thinking, many adjustments. Great work of reading Canelo and his tendencies. And I do think that he will be patient, but he will be trying to set him up. He will not throw the same punches like Bivol did, meaning that Bivol was throwing flurries, even being aggressive against Canelo in the second half of the fight when Canelo lost his team. But he was not throwing the same type of punches. Golovkin is getting much more leverage, and unlike Bivol, who was not setting really Canelo for any hard punch, I'm confident that Triple G is gonna try to do it from time to time at very least, and that's why I think it's different. Yeah, safe bet is no one gets hurt, that it gets stopped, but I think that
I mean,
I
official.
think that yeah.
Sorry, you cut out. I thought you'd finished.
No problem. I was basically finished. Go on, please.
Another different angle I want to look at is, let's look at the psychological aspect of the fight and their mental approaches coming into this fight, because I think that's a potential key, and it could shape the way the fight is fought. For Canelo Alvarez, this fight is obviously, I think it's laborious. I think it's almost a nuisance for him to get back into the ring with Golovkin, something he clearly doesn't want. And history and the dates of the fights and the time in between the fights, I think, will emphasize that and almost elucidate it. And Canelo has obviously tried to, we've seen the measures he's taken in waiting out Golovkin, and certainly it is ridiculous, when you've gone to the extent of extricating yourself from the biggest sporting contract, not for the sake that you've never had visibility of your contract. Now, I do have sympathy with him when the agreement is between Golden Boy and the Zone, and you don't have visibility of a contract. You're ultimately the prize fighter who's generating revenue for both of them. Yeah, I can certainly understand your contention, but that's a bit of a Trojan horse. We know that the Zone were very keen on this fight to happen years before, and it definitely should have had. And this is the extent at which Alvarez has gone, and then not operating at 160, but you're clearly gone up to a different weight category, just to put another roadblock in between the fight happening. And then you can try and pacify your fans, saying that I'm trying to become the first undisputed champion at 168. And we know these Mexicans and the Latinos are extremely gullible and they'll believe everything. But it's only the real ones, who can, at least acknowledge and try and say that, well, no, this is BS. We know exactly why he's operating at 168, which we all knew was the weakest division, given that you've not even fought the best fighter at 168. He's still waiting for that fight. So Alvarez clearly does not want this first fight. It is a nuisance for him. So definitely that could have an impact on his approach. Whereas I think with Golovkin, and what you can see now is almost a content Golovkin who will acknowledge and he will remind audiences that he's the better fighter and that he's won both of the first. Much like when Roman Gonzalez, when he talks about Estrada, saying that I've won all of the fights, and you have that certain level of content. You've already proved it to yourself. You're the better fighter. So it's not a case of redemption that much. Whereas it would have been for Golovkin in the second fight, he would have been angry and thinking, how the fuck was that fight a draw? The approach now, I think, with Golovkin is hunger, because you've got all 4 championship belts on the line. And we know how badly Golovkin wanted to be undisputed middleweight champion, not only from a legacy standpoint, but given the fact that you've had a record number of defenses as well. So the records are important to him, but now he has the opportunity not only to be, unified at one weight category, but he has, and you can see the hunger and the desire and the invigoration in him to say that, yeah, it's not about proving to the world that I'm a better fighter. It's now about winning, becoming an undisputed champion at a new weight category. And that's why I'm seeing a different, more content, a hungry, a calmer Golovkin, more of a measured guy as well.
I love the way you just described that. I agree with you 100%. Really perfect. And in our previous show, when we did our pound for pound top 10 list, I mentioned that my suspicions that Golovkin used all this time, these past couple of years, since hooking up with Jonathan Banks, that he chose Jonathan Banks to work with him with this third fight in mind, that all these previous fights were kinda just preparation, one long camp working towards one approach that he would take when he finally faces Canelo for the third fight. And I'm seeing the same things in Golovkin, kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing when it comes to people's worries about his age, etc. And me myself, as a big Triple G fan, I would say it sucks that not getting the decision that he deserved both times, that now at 40 years old, by taking this fight, he's giving Canelo the opportunity to even possibly stop him or legitimately win a fight against him. But it is what it is. We already know that in his prime what type of fighter he is, and people already know that. At least most of them think that he won both of those fights. So it is what it is for the third fight, and he seemed to be much calmer, and he's even since the promotion for this third fight started, he's been trolling Canelo a bit, openly talking not only about the scorecards, but in multiple interviews saying that Canelo was waiting for him to get this old, even joking that he was thinking that this third fight is going to take place when he's 50 years old, so he's kind of surprised. And his demeanor is really calm, which really brings me to the same point that you mentioned, that uh, that he took a very measured approach and that he knows for sure how he's going to fight Canelo tomorrow night. Now, yeah, for sure, his age may prevent him from, doing the things that he would be able to do a few years ago, but I'm sure that he would be taking the right approach. Because, look, like I said earlier, first fight, for example, when he was younger, many years than he is now, he was 35 back then or 36, but still that approach was very bad with his offense being very predictable against Canelo. Now, this third fight, it looks like it's Canelo's offense that's getting predictable. Meanwhile, Golovkin is the guy who already was very cerebral with extremely high ring IQ, and being that he knows Canelo so well by now, I'm, yeah, even despite his age, I'm having high hopes. And I'm sorry to Canelo's fans. I mean, I do respect Canelo a lot as a fighter, and man, you're going to see for yourself when I drop some of the videos tomorrow before the fight. But yeah, people would say, like Canelo's fans, especially, like, oh, Triple G, now you guys supporting him. If he loses, you're not going to give credit to Canelo. We know who Canelo is already. We are just not overrating him. But it's Canelo's fault that he brought himself in this situation where winning over Golovkin at this stage of his career does not mean a lot. So and I'm not trying to hate, but uh, I'm really being objective. It's his fault that he chose to, even the first fight happened a bit too late, not to mention the second or even this one. So yeah, it's Canelo's problem that he chose to finally fight him this late. Meanwhile, Golovkin, of course, at this point of his career, he's going to get much bigger respect for a victory than Canelo would. But situation is such that it would be desirable.
Absolutely. No. Good. Excellent points. And just just to just to keep that sort of momentum now with Golovkin, it's one of the reasons, official, that the pre-misconceptions and just the underlying hatred towards Golovkin, and certainly on his resume. Now when you have a situation that we talked about, Canelo Alvarez absolutely avoiding him not only once, twice, but the number of years he has been, and it's clear when you've literally vacated your belt, thrown it in the ring, Riddick Bowe style, in the trash can, just to avoid a fight. And then the substances in between, and then the third fight in which you null and void your contract and then move weight divisions, etc. Just amazing approaches he's actually taken to extricate himself from this fight that fans will still not acknowledge because of just an underlying prejudice, hatred towards Golovkin. But Golovkin over the years has had this problem. When you've got Miguel Alvarez, Miguel Cotto, and Sergio Martinez, and all of these fighters who clearly didn't want to avoid him like the plague. So what was Golovkin left to do? He had no alternative but to fight his mandatory challengers, or anybody who was available, was able to accept terms and get in the ring with him. So what's he supposed to do? You can't tell a fighter just because these guys are avoiding you move up and down weights. That's not his fault. If he wants to remain at 160 pounds, that's his proclivity. So be it. The criticism should be towards the fighters who either have belts or those who have avoided him. But Golovkin, he's like Vasily in this. There's those fighters that unfortunately are they're the focal point of the scathe for boxing fans who are not objective or not sort of neutral. And it's a pity because what happens is that you get a fighter who you don't appreciate him for what he is or what he's brought to the ring or his ability to fight, but you focus on little cliches and some of these ridiculous situations like with an Andre Ward in which a fight potentially could have happened, but it would have never happened because Ward was clearly at 175 pounds, but they'll just focus on the little innuendos and the false stories and the kind of tactics which Ward would do once Golovkin has actually signed a fight, and then you start the media trolling and laying down false smoke signals, etc., in which you're postulating that it's more Golovkin avoiding the fights, but boxing fans, falling victim to those typical media games that these cowards like Andre Ward has played throughout his career. But Golovkin, for whatever reason, is just heavily criticized, and it's a pity because he's clearly one of the best fighters that we've seen, certainly, and what he's done in the ring. And you got to remember, this is a Kazakh fighter, operating in the United States, predominantly, but fighting and winning titles, wherever it takes him, whether it's in the UK, big fights, or in Japan.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And on top of that, imagine if his approach to media and the fans was different. Look, he's a type of guy that doesn't like to be a drama queen on social media, etc. So imagine if he was publicly telling everything about how certain fighters ducked him, because there were many times where he would be offering fights in his prime to different fighters that would duck him and not mention him. Uh, the offers were being sent to Andrade, to Lara back in the day, but those fighters, as well as many others, who we may not even know about being offered a
Yeah,
fight with Golovkin, but he's just the type of guy like some of the other European guys, Eastern European and Asian, that they do not like that. Twitter shit, etc.
yeah,
But maybe it would have been better for him if he did it. For example, Alim Kanuli Janibek, he's doing a great job, man. Like you said, it's as if Cool Keith managed his Twitter account, and I love it because it's not all talk. He's trying to get in the ring with those guys. Uh,
and
yeah,
Erislandi informed me that when he heard about the Golovkin offer, he rejected it and he decided to join the Apostles.
yeah. Yeah, that's a great inside joke. Oh, wait, when we make the whole world know about the apostles.
Yeah, it's a pity that with brother Guillermo Rigondio having to leave the
Your
Apostles,
mic
giving
is
us.
fucked up. Still sounds fucked up.
How's it
I
now?
think it's better. Oh no,
Is it okay?
same. No, not okay. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think Louise is monitoring communications.
Yeah.
How is it now? Any better?
Same. It sounds muffled, very muffled.
All right. I'll jump. I'll jump out and I'll jump back in. Yeah.
Okay, you have the link.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So, okay, I'm waiting for you. Yeah, I just lost my train of thought, but I was about to get back to this fight to say a couple of more things. Yeah, I've been studying a lot the rematch, as well as some of others, Canelo's recent fights, and man, there are really many questions about this fight. By the way, you guys in the chat, how do you see it going? I know that Andre, he thinks Canelo is going to win. I don't know about you other guys. But yeah, it's a safe bet, like earlier discussed with corruption, that uh, the stoppage is probably not going to happen, although there are good chances, objectively good chances for both fighters to score the stoppage. Uh, Let me see, corruption is still not back. Yeah, but anyways, I mean, I'm not trying to promote, but tomorrow I will be dropping hopefully even 7 or 8 breakdown videos on both fighters, on Canelo and Golovkin. I'm just not sure how much time I will have to prepare and edit them all, but I'll do my best. So I'm going through that list and trying to see. Oh, corruption is back.
Yeah, the internet is just a little bit problematic last few days. How is the audio signal now?
Oh, it's perfect now.
Okay. Anyway, official,
So
there's not too much more to add. I think we've covered this fight pretty substantially. You've obviously got some addendums, some film analysis, which you're going to upload tomorrow. It's one of those shows in which it would have been perfect to have done it on something like Odyssey, where we can actually play the fights, certain clips, and talk about them real time, and to really articulate the nuances, the intricacies, which a lot of boxing observers don't really have the ability to decipher.
yeah, it's always better when we are talking about some of their moves to show the film, so it would be easier to show people what we are talking about, because many times I'm sure when I'm trying to explain to you or anyone else some situations from the fights, that it's really difficult for you to understand. Same thing for me, many times happened to me that I just cannot get it without being shown the film. So yeah, but I would say we covered almost all the angles. Uh, but but look, I'm not trying to duck the, how do you say, um, to 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 duck giving you my prediction, but I'm really still wondering what is going to happen. I'm not sure. Uh, Maybe probably the safe bet would be Canelo on points, but everything is possible. Uh, so even Triple G, we gave our reasons why. Beside all, obviously, he's really great and really underrated boxing skills, but also some other things are the reasons why he may very well get decision this time. Although Canelo's star power should be favored. So if I'm going to give a prediction, a safe bet would be Canelo by on points. But man, I don't know. I just know and analyze Golovkin's boxing skills and ring IQ, and I just cannot not I cannot prevent myself from thinking from them. And to me, Golovkin is a better fighter, skill much better, and I definitely can see him deserving the victory on points by but getting robbed. I can see a really competitive tight fight, and Canelo getting the decision, or maybe he shows his age and he deservingly loses the fight. But yeah, anyways, to me, there is no doubt. Triple G is the man.
No, officially, I mean, it's not an easy prediction, because there's so many new variables. Given that it's a new weight category for Golovkin, it's Canelo coming off a defeat. Golovkin, obviously, with different trainers now, coming off a very impressive victory. But the fact is that for Golovkin's, deterioration, what is the rate? What is the rate of that deterioration fight to fight? Or does he have enough robustness to sustain it even longer? Somebody like that, obviously, given that what we've seen over the years, and with a remarkable chin and the punching power he still has, which can sustain him in those fights. And with Alvarez, obviously, with maybe a regressed skill set, but he still has that foundation from his, bodily transformations. But now he's coming back. So there's just so many variations and wrinkles. That's what makes this a really fascinating fight. And it's a pity there's a lot of criticism, but I understand it from the perspective of boxing fans in the United States or whoever holds a DAZN account, in which DAZN have not done themselves any justice in doing a complete U-turn on the payment structure of the fights. Initially, not in saying, that's that is disgusting. But for me, it was always inevitable. And I did a video on this going years back on DAZN structure, in which the subscription-based structure is just not sustainable in boxing. Unfortunately, pay-per-view, a traditional structure, is the only way that's going to be sustained going forward. But DAZN's sort of inexperience in this field, and given that when you're dealing with a lot of different sporting activities around the world, but your strategy is long-term based on very long deals, this sort of 7 to 12-year deals, taking away. It's a pity that they're going around this route, because it indicates a lot of short to mid to interim losses, in which they're not getting. They're obviously worried about their long-term strategy now in the market, so it's a pity. So you've got the transparency that which they need, and sadly they're reneging on their earlier promises. And so I can understand that a lot of people being absolutely pissed off at the fight. I don't think it's got anything to do with Golovkin, because they talk about an old age Golovkin, but they don't talk about a 38-year-old Robert Helenius fighting Deontay Wilder on pay-per-view. That's perfectly acceptable. So there's a lot of double standard. When a Robert Helenius, let's remind you, got knocked out by Gerald Washington, of all people. So yeah.
No, that's a fight worth watching and paying for, but not Golovkin and Canelo.
Yeah, that's a mega fight,
Hypocrisy.
Yeah, I'm not gonna criticize Luis Ortiz and Andy Ruiz, because that was a fully justifiable pay-per-view from my perspective.
Oh yeah.
For reasons that many people wouldn't fathom, but I'm not gonna continue with that one, or we're gonna see a massive reduction in our subscription. So I'll stop on that one straight away. But yeah, it's not as if a lot of people even operate in the sense, given just given the frequency and just how readily available a lot of these illegal streams are as well. So it's hard to know who's paying for fights, whatever. But yeah, it doesn't help when you've got an annual subscription, and now you're paying another, whatever it is, $69 for this fight as well. So you've got to be realistic at a time in which economies around the world are in deep recession simultaneously. The UK, Europe, Holland here, Germany, everywhere around the world, even China, massive problems around the world. So it's not they've really got to, look at the situation and try and be a little bit more sympathetic to boxing fans, because we're talking about two multi-millionaire fighters. So you got to have you've got to be a little bit pragmatic and have a degree of compassion as well, to fight fans. But greed, absolute greed, these carriers.
It is what it is.
Yeah, they're so worried about it. We're seeing the way Showtime and Fox are operating now. They're not even putting any money into the productions. They're just
Exactly.
allowing. Yeah, they're just allowing them to use their pay-per-view, their carrying sort of platforms. So they'll take whatever source, 50% at source. They're just worried about not making any losses. They're not worried about making money is not even in the norm for these guys. Hence the reason why they're getting out of boxing. It's all about minimizing losses or not making any loss at all. So we're not financing. That is down to the promoter, etc. And the promoter is not doing that as well, because their model is all about not even utilizing their own money, but it's about investments and advertising and third-party revenue coming in. So boxing is in a very, very bad situation at the moment.
Yes, it is perfectly said. Yeah, I mean, Showtime, yeah, they're being that, like you said, they're already on their way out, and there are news coming out that Showtime will go to Paramount, etc., and which usually means that they will be cutting on stuff, etc., and probably on boxing, being that is not profitable. Certainly not. Boxing is certainly not profitable on Showtime for Showtime. Um, so yeah, just I mean, no need to repeat what you just said because you explained it perfectly. But yeah, just trying to minimize the losses because
and also
it is what
officially,
it is.
and also talking about this pay-per-view fight tomorrow, there's a couple of interesting fights on the undercard.
Oh yeah.
Three fights in total now. There's an interesting fight at super middleweight between Gennady Golovkin's fighter Ali Akhmedov taking on the Philadelphia old school warrior Gabe Rosado. Akhmedov obviously trying to rebound from what was at the time a sort of a shock defeat up against a good fighter, but a fighter who there was not a great deal of visibility in coming up in Carlos Gongora, who subsequently has lost as well. So pretty crazy situation, but yeah, interesting fight. And I mean, Rosado obviously not looking good in his last fight. I think that was against Shane Mosley Jr., if I'm not mistaken. Having suffered
You're right.
having suffered what was probably a surprising defeat in that fight, given Shane Mosley's very high sort of value name, but there's clearly not from what I've seen a hell of a lot of boxing ability behind it. But yeah, that could be an interesting fight. You'd still think Akhmedov is young enough, fresh enough to probably take the fight, but Rosado, for his limited sort of boxing ability now, and he didn't really look very good in his last fight. Maybe he's just got a puncher's chance. I don't think he's got the grip and the sustainability over 12 rounds to maybe outbox Akhmedov. So, but should be an interesting fight. Any thoughts on that one? Have you put down any money on anyone on that one?
No, I have not. But interesting fight indeed. I will be watching it live for sure. I mean, just like it's similar with. I mean, I'm not trying to compare this fight to the fight of Melikuziev that he lost a year or two ago. But Melikuziev was a guy who became predictable with his offense, and he's not the same type of fighter that Akhmedov is. But that fight in between Akhmedov and Gongora was the only fight from Akhmedov that I've seen so far. And watching it, I thought that he was very upright and predictable. Yeah, powerful puncher, sorry. Hits very hard, but it was all predictable. 1, 2, 3s, 1, 2, 3s, one, two,
Yeah,
threes at the same speed, a bit robotic. That's what I got from that fight. And surviving his initial onslaught, Gongora was able to get on the inside and confuse him, doing much less predictable things. And he, Gongora performed really, really well in that fight. Just what he was supposed to do on the outside and in the inside later against Akhmedov. So I'm wondering how much has he changed since that fight. I would like to believe that training with Triple G, mm, and or his coaches made him aware of it. So if that's
yeah.
the case, then there should be no fear against this extremely, extremely faded version of Rosado from what we got from him in his last fight.
I mean, for people who haven't seen that fight, that's a very underrated little war. Akhmedov and Gongora. Man,
Oh
were they
yeah,
laying?
yeah.
Man, they were laying down some leather in that one. Akhmedov obviously had him in trouble as well, but you're right. He became too monotonous. When you just knocking at people, you
Corruption.
just get into
Sorry for cutting you off, but I
yeah,
forgot to say he also punched himself out. He really,
yes,
swinging
yeah.
on those punches. I saw that he lost a lot of stamina. Sorry for cutting you off. Please go
No,
on.
no, you're absolutely right. And that's the problem with these. I mean, certainly with fighters who have that, who are just having, victory after victory against, you can say that they're on the up and coming. So it's just cans there for them to knock out as well. So they're not that development isn't there. I mean, they're getting no real resistance in their fights. I mean, you're not really learning anything. You learn far more from, as they say, the tougher the battle, the sweeter the victory. So you've really got to develop your craft and have good opposition. And so we'll see what he's doing because he's been working with Jonathan Banks as well. And you mentioned, yeah, he's a Golovkin fighter still. So yeah, let's hope. Yeah, I think he desperately needed a reality check. So I don't think a defeat at that stage of his career is too detrimental for him. So interesting just to see him on his rebound. Whether there's been any maturation, a little bit of fear now, a little bit of reality setting in that you're just not going to knock people out, even if you get him in trouble as well. And then we look at his stamina as well. Is he pacing himself a lot better? Varying his speed for his punches, not a little bit like Nizma in Israel Madrimov now. See whether he's got that more flexibility in his game. So yeah, that's a good little appetizer as well before the co-main event. And we've got super flyweight championship fight. Rodriguez defending his WBC belt, second defense, up against Israel Gonzalez, who's I think this is now his fourth time he's campaigning for a world title. Um, yeah, good little fight. A bit of a maybe a bit of a barometer fight with Rodriguez is probably looking at the way some of the incumbent champions have dealt with Gonzalez and how he's going to deal with them as well. And certainly with Quadras and the Rangvisai now with Gonzalez, like, can he put this guy away as well? So good. I'm good. I'm glad that they've got him out relatively quickly from his last victory, in which that fight captivated a lot of new boxing fans who certainly haven't seen him, and now putting him on a pay-per-view platform, sort of a pay-per-view of this magnitude as well. Very good sort of marketing and management on behalf of whoever's looking after him now. I don't know Eddie Hearn on the international side, and Tekken have still got him as well. So yeah, good little fight. And Israel Gonzalez is certainly better fighter than what his record indicates. A little bit like an Orlando Salido type of fighter.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we spoke about him many times before, especially before and after his fight against Chocolatito Gonzalez, and how he got robbed for the title against another guy that Chocolatito beat. Um, and so, yeah, definitely a tough guy and a big guy, a very big guy for 115 pounds. So that's pound. What I'm trying to say, he's he's long from being amazing in a pound for pound sense. Israel Gonzalez, that's the one who I'm talking about. But given his size advantage over his opponents at 115, it's another plus for whoever beats him. Now, on the other hand, well, so just to remind people, we have Jesse Bam Rodriguez as our current number 5 on our pound for pound list. For a good reason, amazing skills that he's displaying, and he has a lot of potential. We're looking forward for him to upgrade himself as a fighter even more, all, because he's surely going to progress in his career and only become even better than he is. He finally started fighting some really respectful fighters. Yeah, they're on a downslide, but it's not like the best possible opponent for him. We are looking forward to see him in even bigger fights against the other champions and pound for pound or close to pound for pound level fighters. And the 115 division is full of them, luckily. On the other hand, with all the praises that I have for Bam Rodriguez, I also want once again to kind of scrutinize for the same thing, meaning that I'm not a big fan of him even moving down of 115 to moving back to 112. I'm looking forward for him to move up even above 115 because with many times that we spoke about, or me myself, that I spoke about how huge Israel Gonzalez is at 115, looking at that weight in, Israel Gonzalez is only maybe an inch taller than Bam, but it looks that like there is not a lot size difference at all in between them. So it means that Bam Rodriguez is really huge, big for 115, and that's something that I even didn't like with Inoue in the lower weight classes, neither at 112 and 108. So yeah, but that's the only kind of criticism that I have. I'm sure that he will be stepping up. Him and his coach even said it long ago that they will be moving up, but yeah.
But
That's
you
it.
know, with me, official, I sit in a different camp. Maybe a little bit. I'm a little bit more nostalgic because you know the amount of love I have for the 108-pound division. Um,
Oh
so
yeah, absolutely.
so a part of me has always wanted, Rodriguez, against to either put Kenshiro out of his misery, but or or even take on, Hirito Kiyoguchi. But given that those two are finally fighting now, which is almost ironic when Bam is completely out of the division and he's pretty preoccupied at 115 pounds. I don't think Eddie Hearn. It all depends on Joshua Franco if he's going to. But Eddie Hearn knows the money's with Rodriguez. given that Bam Rodriguez, but Bam's obviously has a lot more family humility, and he doesn't want to take the shine away from his brother. He actually wants to increase his profile by stepping aside potential mega fights for his brother to contest those fights, and then indicating that he'd move down to 108 if a fight with Estrada or Roman Gonzalez was perhaps on the cards, in the early part of next year. I'd rather, Joshua take on those two, which it kind of makes sense because, Joshua came down from 118 to 115, so he's obviously naturally the bigger fighter. He's the older fighter as well. So I think Rodriguez, to me, I think a Rodriguez and maybe at 112, Rodriguez and Rey Martinez, or Rodriguez and Junto Nakatani, or Rodriguez against a Kiyoguchi or a Felix Alvarado. That I personally would still like to see those fights.
Well, if from one interview that I saw on Precise's channel, interview from Sonny Edwards, it looked like a fight between Bam Rodriguez and Sonny Edwards is in the making. So for the next year, that's what Sonny kinda suggested in the interview with AFL, if I'm not wrong. I mean, okay, Sonny is a champion there, a belt holder, but like I said, the only for me truly good fight for Bam Rodriguez south of 115 would be Junto Nakatani at 112.
Yeah.
Other than that, I will not be very invested in a fight, or at least I would not any other fight at 112. I would not see it as important for Bam Rodriguez in my eyes.
Yeah.
But you know what, corruption. Still, I cannot be at peace with myself to end this stream with picking Canelo on points, even by robbery. Not that. I mean, yeah, you should never bet, predict a fight or bet with your emotions. Um, but something has been telling me like. I don't even know how possible it is that Golovkin would be able to win either by decision or late stoppage. I really kind of had some feeling that there may be we may have a late stoppage, Triple G stopping Canelo. I don't know how, but maybe it's my mind playing tricks on me. So yeah, I'm basically ducking this prediction. I can see anything happen.
Yeah, even Golovkin via robbery decision is very possible. They could definitely do that. I know it almost sounds like a crazy sort of paradox, but I think that's very possible. Because as I said, you've got to look at the probability, and you've got to look at what way direction the money is being placed. The bookies will make a tremendous amount of money, given that the vast amount of money and the huge amount of money is on Alvarez to win the fight. So Golovkin winning by points, there could be some sizable payouts, but the frequency of those would be substantially less, as opposed to like a blanket sort of, if you've got like a baseline sort of bet. So that is absolutely possible. Yeah, that's one of the little small bets that I've been looking at as well. Golovkin via decision. I think that's absolutely possible. Yeah, Golovkin via Stoppage, Canelo via points, and Canelo via all four of those permutations are absolutely possible.
Yeah. I mean, no one would be crazy for picking any of them. Definitely.
All right. Unfortunately, I'm at a bit of a time constraint from a health perspective. I'm still feeling very, very bad. So I think I've exhausted all of my energy. Let's just hope Golovkin has more energy than me tomorrow night. But yeah, big up to the official for organizing the show at the 12th hour. knowing my punctuation is not been too brilliant in my recently.
No, it's my pleasure. I was only afraid as the show was approaching that you're going to pull Tyson Fury on me and start the show, leave me hanging.
Yeah, I was gonna do an Andrade, man, but I thought no. Or an Adrian Broner, man, and pull out.
Yeah. That's the one. Adrian Broner.
No, I got sympathy for Broner, man. The way Al Heyman's been paying him in chump change, man. Not even giving the guy his money. But anyway, fuck that one. Yeah.
It's like being a parent giving your kids some money and
yeah, his allowance. Yeah, man.
Here's $10 until the next week.
Al's been using Broner's allowance for more transsexuals, man. It's just crazy. What sort of world are we coming to? Saeed is pissed off, man. No wonder why he doesn't want to go through the fight, man. He's making a statement, man. He's like, I mean, what you doing with all of those? What you doing with all of those New York skags, man? Broner's probably got some beautiful, higher transsexuals for him, but well, we'll leave that one anyway. Just want to thank.
We finished the show on that note.
Yeah, we'll thank all of the loyal foot soldiers who joined us for the show. Sin, Triple J, John Gonzalez. Who else we got?
Nordic Warrior, Sina Mosia. There was also Max Kackerman and Andre Rodriguez. And Shazar. Shazar, big up to him as well. Sina Mosia. Yeah.
Yeah, hello to Sin. Long time no interaction in Kenji with him. Well, I'll get back to some sort of Discord in the future.
Hi. Okay, so on that note, I wish you all great weekend. Enjoy the fights, and yeah, thank you for staying along with us. See you the next time. Corruption, over to you.
Yeah, we'll come back with a post-fight. We'll probably do it, if possible, we'll do it fresh Sunday, whilst the fight is still fresh in our minds, and it's going to be a hell of a lot of sort of post-fight reaction. So if Official and myself, we can coordinate it. We'll be back on Sunday morning or afternoon, something like that. Does that sound good, Official?
Sounds good, yeah, for sure.
Good. All right. Kudetara Boxing, sayonara.